This is Andy Turner, the Education Technologist at Illinois College. Today I wanted to show you a form where the form is something that you can fill out and retain permissions. In this case, we've got an arbitrary data set where we've got an HTML form with a drop-down list. And these represent three different users that are in the system in advance. When I select the first user, it wants to know the password in order to get the report information. Now if I enter in the password Q and hit go, it knows my username. However, it knows that I selected the incorrect password. If I type in the correct password, then it goes ahead and gives me the data. This could be an arbitrarily long data report or a redirection to another web page. It could be anything. Of course, this username could be any username as well. Now, the code for this program all depends on something called JavaScript object notation, and it is literally a JavaScript object. In this case, it's an array object. I'm sorry, and it's a variable called array, and this annotates, this indicates that it is an object. And here you have a key and a value, a key and a value. So these key value pairs exist for each object, in this array. So array is an array of objects, where each object has three data elements. Three attributes, if you will. Three properties. A key, or a name, and a value. So this is a very simplistic example. But through this, and we can generate this type of data in the JSON format, JavaScript object notation, from any program such as Excel. So in Excel, if we open that up, or Notepad, for example, we can connect Excel to an ODBC data source from an Access database, SQL Server, OData. There are many from a SQL Server table, from your existing ODBC connections, a DSN like Access would use, etc., even from a web page. So we can have a set of usernames where we have Bob, Mary, and Alice, and their passwords would be 321, 654, and 987. So if I want to save this as a comma-separated value, I will go ahead and save this out as a CSV. I'll just save it to the desktop. And we'll call it comma delimited, and we'll call it usernames. So I have usernames.csv. Now that I have that CSV, I'm going to go out to the web. I'm going to Google for CSV to JSON converter, just to save me having to type that JSON. It's a little more cumbersome than entering it into Excel, so I will go ahead and find the username CSV. Thought I saved it to the desktop. Save it to the desktop. I must have saved that in downloads last time. Okay. So now in this we should have usernames. Yeah, I saved it to downloads last time. Apologies. And here we have the data. I will go ahead and convert the CSV to JSON like so. And here I have... Oh, that's not correct. Okay, the data format should be more like this, where you have for every entity you have a password. So this would be 987-654 and 321. So this time we'll save that again as a CSV. We'll go back. So I should have inverted that data structure. And let's see what that looks like. Refresh this page. Update that. Usernames, file, and there we go. So I have a single object in an array. Where I have the key and the value, username, and the password. So that was just a matter of pasting that here. Now I take that data, as you can see, in this format with the square braces. That means it's an array, and inside of here I have an array of objects. I assign that array of objects to a variable called array. Now because that is in the same directory, I can type this HTML data and refer to the array of JSON data, or the array of JavaScript objects, essentially. So because I'm pulling this in to the global window object, I can create arrays to extract the data out of each key here. Get the username from each object, put that in an array called username, get the password from each object, put that in a variable called password, and get the data for the report out of each object, and put that in an array called data. Next, I'm just looking at the number of objects in the array, and we could say the username.length or array.length, I believe, and then we use the increment operator. This is for safety reasons to not use I++. Douglas Crockford has an excellent explanation of why he opts to not use I++, nor does he use the multi-line comments. He uses only the single-line comments, so I will adhere to that recommendation. Now here we have, for every element of this array of objects, for every object, we're extracting the username and putting it into the username array. So we're filling up these arrays with the corresponding keys for each object. Now we've got 3 arrays, one for username, one for password, and one for data. And now all of those are accessible independently. Here, later on down this form, this JavaScript file, this HTML file, in the script tag we have document.write, which is not recommended for most applications, but in this case it's for tutorial purposes, where we have HTML generation, and we simply wrap that HTML in single quotes to accommodate the double quotes inside. You must alternate to preserve the formatting. We're writing HTML, And in this case, we're creating a form element with a selection, an ID of name, and when a selection in that HTML form is selected with the left mouse click, that lets the browser know to run this function called trigger, and it has this, which is its own object, and the value that was pulled from the form. So back at the form, here is our form. These are the three objects. Now, this is populated dynamically from the array of objects. And again, that could come from any data source. So the for loop here, this iteration structure, goes over all of the objects in the array, and it creates an option for each object. And here's where we have the three objects. It's creating a selection, which is a selectable item here in the list due to this code. Next, we're closing out the selection statement in the form. Now I'm creating a global variable called user input so that it's accessible inside the function block scope below. I'm taking the value that's given as an argument. I'm calling trigger with this argument, and again, this is what is selected. It's this. ABC is this. It's the value of this, which is ABC. So it's the value of this, which is ABC. So it's triggering with ABC. So it's saying ABC is what the user input. Now I've got a new variable k, and it's iterating over the amount of the number of objects in the array, and it's saying get the username from the kth, or that particular index, get that each particular username out of the array of objects, and give it to and compare it to this user input. So if what was selected on the form is equal to the username that's positioned at the index corresponding to the current index. So in other words, if index is equal to k, which it always will, because index here above I'm assigning index to k. So if the user input, in other words, if ABC is equal to the current username, in other words, in the array of usernames, because these are sequential, and because this is the first username by definition, and because this is the second username, and because this is the third username, and because there's a symmetric mapping between this is the first username, in other words, this is always the first index, this is always the second, this is always the third. Because these are sequenced like so, contiguously, then there will be a corresponding mapping here. These are contiguous. ABC is always before DEF, and GHI is always after DEF. So, because of this continuity here, this contiguous relationship, which is always going to be true, then assign the index to the current index. The variable index gets the actual index of the position in that list. So really it's just saying if the second one in the list is DEF, and it is. If the first one in the array is ABC, and it is. If the third one is always GHI, and it is. And that little bit of logic gets us the following behavior. It lets us create a new form where we say, this person has entered in that their username is ABC. Well, if you're ABC, then you'll know what your password is. So it's giving you the opportunity to enter ABC and ABC's password next. So here's what we have. I'm going to select ABC. It says, well, to get your report, you need to know ABC's password. So ABC's password, I'm going to take a guess for it. I'm going to say it's T. And I'm going to hit go. T is not the correct password. The correct password for ABC is this. So let's type that in. 1, 2, 3. We'll hit go. So password is correct, and it gives me data 1. Data 1 is the data. That can be a very long, complicated data report that could potentially also be a dynamically growing list, a dynamically updated list. Then the way that happens is it says if the response that the user entered, in other words, what they typed in the text box here, if this, what they typed, is equal to the password on file for that index position, in other words, this, then go ahead and give them the data. Otherwise, don't. So that, in a nutshell, is how you can do single sign-on, where you're providing a redirection to another page or a simple list of data, or you're essentially implementing authentication here. Now the authorization is done through the means of assigning, of making available the access to the data to specific users. So data 1 could be available to DEF in addition to data 2. This username could have data 3 and data 1. That's all implementable here, and that's basically the nuts and bolts of how you implement single sign-on with JavaScript in the browser using no database. What you would have to do is protect this array.js file using Windows authentication, and then you would have to run this web page as a service account that no one would know the username or password to. And the directory, this file would not be able to list this file in Windows. So you couldn't just navigate to this page and look at the list of usernames. You wouldn't have permission to do so. That would be implemented through Windows, through IIS or Apache Tomcat or what have you in other operating systems. So that is providing access to data in a nutshell through a globally or a dynamically populated HTML form with nothing but HTML and JavaScript. Thanks very much. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.